Hey, I'm Bruce Prichard, and you're Conrad Thompson. This is Something to Wrestle with Bruce Prichard. You know how I know that? You know how I know that, Conrad?
How do you know
I
that?
see the little red button. It's not even a button that says that we're recording right now.
Well, I'm glad we're recording because we're picking up where we left off. We're talking about the territories, and
Well,
Bruce,
we're talking about bookers,
yes,
not like bookkeepers, which was great. One time I was traveling on a plane, and Pat and Ed's had all their books out. So the books that we used to use were like accounting ledgers almost, but they're huge, and we're sitting there and going through, and we're writing all of our stuff and looking at the towns, talking to each other. And the guy sitting next to me says to me, "Oh, he must be the bookkeeper." I looked at him. He's talking about Pat, and I looked at him and said, "You could say that." And so, yeah, it's the bookers. Don't have no bookers no more. Booker, not T. Because there is a Booker T, but he's my buddy, so it's all good.
I saw nothing but great feedback about last week's show. I think people really enjoyed an opportunity to hear you talk about the good old days before things really changed in the 80s.
Well, it was different. It was different. It was a different way of running the business. And as Nick Bockwinkel used to say, we all used to say, it was cottage industry. And by that, I mean that people ran their own territories in their own areas and never really branched out. They didn't expand. They didn't franchise, if you will. And they kept everything inside. And a lot of it was cash business. So I would venture to guess that, not everything was reported per se to government officials for their taxes at the end of the year. And it was a different business, and then it became big business, and it spanned the globe. It became a global phenomenon. So yeah, it was a lot different at the time because you had a promoter, and the promoter was the one that owned the town. If you could, again, another thing that I always argue: what do you really own?
Right.
Okay, they owned the town, so they had the TV, they had the buildings, they ran the town, they did the promotion, they did the legwork. They were the local guy in town. And then you had your booker, and you had your booking office, and the booking office is what supplied the talent to the promoters around the country, or around the territory, if you will, and sometimes the country.
Well, let's talk about another part of the country. We got to talk about Texas. And when we think about Texas wrestling, we got to talk about Fritz Von Erich. We teased it last week. Of course, world class, one of the more iconic territories, recently featured on the silver screen for the Iron Claw movie. Talk to us about world class and what Fritz brought as a booker.
Well, long before world class, Fritz started world class because Fritz finally got fed up with the NWA. I think everybody eventually just got fed up with the NWA. The NWA had become a joke. It had become just 3 letters. That's all it was. It provided nothing, for its promoters that were members. So, you go back to the early formation of Fritz and Ed McLemore in Dallas, Texas, who in the 60s, I believe it was, the booking office in Texas was always in Houston, run by Morris Siegel. And Morris Siegel was a predecessor to Paul Boesch. When Morris Siegel passed away, Paul bought the promotion, which was called the Gulf Athletic Club, from Morris Siegel's widow. And Fritz and Paul didn't get along. And this was an opportunity for Fritz to have his own territory, for him to book. And Fritz kind of edged out Ed McLemore, and Fritz became the boss and the booker and the owner of the territory. Fritz brought in several different bookers. He brought in, Gary Hart, who was probably the guy with the most longevity as far as booking Dallas. Red Bastine, I know, came in and helped for a little while, but Gary was the foundation, and Gary was the guy that was there for the longest. Paul then, was focusing on Houston. Paul was like, "You take the book, I'll book my talent through the Dallas booking office. Southwest Sports was the name of the company that Fritz formed, that was the company that ran Dallas and the company that supported the booking of all of the talent." And Paul decided to use Fritz, and it was kind of a wrestling war there for a while, because people were battling for power. And you know what happens when there's a split in things? There's guys that, well, I'm loyal to this guy, or I'm loyal to that guy. There were people that were loyal to the Houston office, and there were people that were loyal to the Dallas office. And usually you got to pick one or the other. And if you try and run the middle and you try and do both, and you're a double secret kayfabe spy, that doesn't always work out. And that's kind of what happened with the gentleman by the name of Otto Koos. Otto Koos and Marvin Jones were the referees. And a lot of times they would carry the finishes, and they would be the ones in charge in the towns that would come in and say, "Okay, here's what we're doing tonight. This is coming from the office." And they both kind of got burned, and everything eventually settled down. Otto settled down at the Slender Bollock Health Club in Houston. And don't ever know what really happened to Marvin Jones, but Marvin ended up going back to Dallas for a very, very short stint. They took him back, but all those guys kind of got ostracized from the business overall, because of, they couldn't pick a side. They picked both, and they tried to work both, and they tried to give each office information on the other, which doesn't always work out, man. And so it was some interesting times. But about 1968, 1969 is when Fritz really came into power, and they had Southwest Sports that ran Dallas. They were affiliated with the NWA, which meant they were members of the NWA and had access to the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. At that time, Dory Funk. Dory would eventually drop that title to Harley Race, who would then drop the title to Jack Briscoe, who would then drop the title to Terry Funk, and so on and so forth. Not Terry Funk, but then Harley, then Terry, and so on and so forth. But Fritz really, when Fritz's kids got old enough to start working, Gary was the booker. And Gary, they had a unique situation in Dallas, because the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolis has such a large area to work that you could work, man, not even 60 miles from your house. Those were the trips. You could work spot shows every night and never have to travel more than an hour from your house. They still ran the money town was Friday in Houston. That was a 5-hour drive. They had run San Antonio, Austin somewhat, but that was a Joe Blanchard end of things. And Fritz was, the king of Texas, because he was the guy that supplied the talent to all of those different markets. And Paul kind of looked at it like, all right, I'm going to use your office. And Paul used the Dallas office because of its ties to the NWA. But Paul booked Houston separately. Paul would bring in his own guys. Paul would had his own television and used his own programs. He didn't do the same thing that was being done. He didn't take Dallas TV and put it in Houston. He did his own TV. Paul was the host, and Paul made the stories. Paul wrote all the angles, and Paul was the one that was in charge of Houston from a creative standpoint and from a promotional standpoint. But Paul didn't go out beyond the Houston city limits. Every once in a while, we would run a spot show in Port Arthur, Texas, or Beaumont, or Galveston. But those were little tiny towns, man, around the peripheral of the Houston market that got Houston TV and they didn't get Dallas TV. They got Houston TV. So for the longest time, Gary was the booker. Red Bastien came in, and Red Bastien helped out a little bit, and booked Dallas for a little while Gary was still there. But when it was time for Red to leave, then Gary took over the book again. And everybody talks about world class, man. World class didn't come until so much later. And I'm talking like the 80s when Kerry had won the title. So this people didn't get this, man, until after Kerry won the title, when they became world class. That's when Fritz broke away, because Fritz knew that his kids weren't getting the championship after that. Fritz didn't care for the way that they treated Kerry. He felt that Kerry should have had a run with the championship, and Kerry didn't. Kerry was a transitional championship. They did that as a feel-good moment out of respect for Fritz, and the fact that, David was really the one being groomed for that title that was going to be the long-term NWA champion. So Fritz got disenfranchised. There was a time that Fritz was the president of the NWA and wielded the power, and Fritz was the final say. That didn't last long either, because I don't think that Fritz got the support of other promoters, and Fritz had his own territory to run and realized, man, I've got a gold mine over here, and I've got all this gold that I'm panning in Kevin and David and Kerry, that I'm going to bank on myself. And Fritz broke away from the NWA and formed World Class Championship Wrestling. And in that, Fritz created his own championship. He created his own World Class champion. He created, the tag team champion, the 6-man tag team championships, because he had 3 boys. And by God, he had 3 guys that were also made of gold in the Freebirds that came in and just popped that market. And I think that a lot of people will, go back and they'll look at, boy, the Von Erichs really popped Dallas. I don't think the Von Erichs could have popped Dallas nearly as well as they did if it were not for the Freebirds.
Right.
Because you had 3, young, well, you had Michael and Bam Bam that were young, and then you had Buddy Roberts. But you had 3 young, fresh heels that were different than anything that Dallas had, up until that point. And, Gary had brought them in, and Michael was like, Bam Bam, you need to get here, boy. Boy, you need to get wherever you're doing, you need to get here. This place on fire. And came in and programmed the Von Erichs with the Freebirds. And you talk about a historic, just great run. The Freebirds and the Von Erichs, in my opinion, I'm from afar. We had already broken away in 81, whatever it was, from the Dallas booking office and had gone to Southwest out of San Antonio, which we talked a little bit about last time. And but the Freebird Von Erich angle, man, that was live. That was some
that was their high water mark, right?
By all means.
Yeah.
By all means.
And that's Gary Hart's booking?
Yeah. Yeah, and then Ken Mantell came in after that, and I think Ken kind of inherited a lot of the Freebird stuff. I know Ken gets knocked an awful lot as far as his booking and his booking style. I like Ken. I like Ken a hell of a lot. I thought that Ken was very well organized, and he was he had longevity. So when Ken booked something, Ken was looking for the finish, 6 months down the road.
Mm.
So people didn't always understand that, but I got to know Ken, and I got to travel and work with Ken, actually booking when he was with Mid South. In that, I understood what he was doing. Ken was a much more long-term booker than other people. A lot of guys, man, went in and they'd go week to week and know they had a big show that they had to get to the payoff on. Kenny was looking at, okay, here's what we're going to do over 6 months. Then we're going to blow this son of a bitch off. When we blow it off, this is where we're going to go from there.
Right.
And I don't think Ken gets nearly the credit that he deserves for the time that he spent in Dallas. And when Bill Watts decided he was going to go into Dallas with, it was no longer Mid-South, it was UWF, because by God, if there was a World Wrestling Federation, what's bigger than the world? And that's the universe. He's going to be the Universal Wrestling Federation. And Ken Mantell came over to book with Bill Watts, and I thought Ken had a decent run, but Ken was rebuilding at that time, and that was after the Bill Dundee time of booking in Mid-South. So it was a completely different philosophy and different way in how they booked, because you look at Bill Dundee, and a lot of people say Dundee hotshotted. Dundee did hotshot, but what Dundee did was Dundee brought in a whole brand new crew into the Mid-South. When he came in, he brought in guys that had never been on the main stage before. It was a trade with Watts and Jarrett. Watts is like, all right, I'll give you this, you give me that, and we're going to give you Bill Dundee to book it, because he knows how to book these guys. So it was completely different than the philosophy that Bill had with bookers like Ernie Ladd, or, God, there was Ernie, there was Grizzly Smith, different guys that were in a different time frame, and everybody had their own style. Ernie liked the big guys. Ernie liked big guys, and Ernie liked heat. Dundee, most of his talent was not as big. They were smaller guys, but the emphasis was on excitement. The emphasis was on, man, let's get the teenage girls there, because if the teenage girls come to see the good-looking young guys, that the teenage boys will follow. That increases, it's a new audience that you're now building toward. So Dundee coming in to Watts with Rock and Roll Express, with Terry Taylor, with Midnight Express and Jim Cornette, something, that territory you'd never seen before. And we're able to build the damn thing in a different way. So, after that, Bill decided to go into Texas, and he had gotten rid of Dundee. Terry Taylor booked for about 3 or 4 weeks, and I think Slater booked for I think Dick Slater booked, I don't know, maybe 6 months, 9 months. And then Bill made the change to Ken Mantell when he was going to go national, based on Mantell's success in Dallas. So when, Mantell left Dallas, Shit, Michael Hayes may have booked there for a little while. I don't know, but it was Fritz pulling the reins in. Fritz is like, I'm going to book my boys the way I want to book my boys. I'm going to book my territory the way I want to book my territory. And that was kind of the beginning of the end, if you will. And he brought Gary back, and Gary, came in. And but I think that by that point, the business had grown so much and started to pass some of the old timers by.
When we think about Texas way back when, all the different areas, whether it was San Antonio with the Blanchards, or it was Amarillo with the Funks, or it was Fritz, or it was Paul. Who do you think was the power broker of the area? Was it Fritz?
I think Paul was the best. Here's the deal. Okay, you want to say Fritz was the power broker. Fritz was probably the most influential in the NWA, other than the Funks. The Funks still had their say, still had a spot at the table, but it's probably Fritz. I think that the best, and people will say, "Oh, you're being prejudiced because it's where you're from." But look, Houston, you go back and look at Fritz's book. Okay, it's out there where you can see the towns and payoffs that guys would make, and Houston made Dallas's week. Just the 10% paid to the booking office in Dallas made Dallas's week off of Houston. Houston was always, every single week, drew the biggest houses. Every single week, the guys got the best paydays. People would moan and cry if they weren't on the Houston card. So Paul had this kingdom there that he knew guys wanted to work. So for Fritz, it was like, I needed to get guys on Houston. And that's why there was a bit of a rub, and a big rub, when Paul didn't want to use his kids. Didn't think they were good enough. Thought they were being pushed too soon. He didn't think that the audience in Houston did not take to them. They just didn't take to them, because Fritz wasn't a regular in Houston. He would come in and work. They knew him, but he wasn't the star in Houston that he was in Dallas and elsewhere. So Fritz was probably best connected, followed by the Funks. But Paul, if you wanted to make money, you could just work Houston and make more than you would if you worked the other territories without Houston.
So politically, Fritz may have had more success, but financially, Paul did.
Yeah, I mean, but politically, what'd that get him?
Right.
And he lost that stroke. It was, he thought he had a lot of stroke, and then found out that, wow, he really didn't. It was, I hate to say it, it was a sympathy play, for David. And I think that people respected Fritz because, man, he was a self-made man. And
did the way people felt about Fritz change after all that happened to his boys, one after another? Do you think that within the business, like other promoters, the way they viewed him, do you think that changed?
I think there was a sense of, they felt sorry for Fritz. Man, come on, how can you not? It's a horrible tragedy that Fritz went through. So I think that in general, just as human beings, there was a sympathy factor for Fritz. But also at the same time, there was a bit of, damn, Fritz, you got to take some responsibility here. And I don't think Fritz always wanted to step up and take the responsibility. I think Fritz just kind of wanted to sweep a lot of that under the rug and pretend that it didn't happen. By God, look at Kerry, But yes, I think that there was a lot of people that didn't necessarily want to do business and go to Dallas because, man, it was what it was, and it declined pretty quickly after that. And Vince had started his expansion, and Fritz was trying to hang on, making up Von Erichs with Lance Von Erich, and the audience. The audience were afraid, and this is me. This is my opinion. I think the audience was afraid to invest in anybody in Dallas and in world class because they thought they'd lose them subconsciously. You lose David, you lose Mike, you lose Kerry, you lose Chris, and it's tragic. In the middle of that, you lose Gino, another one of your top stars. And that's a lot, man. That's a lot to deal with. And that's in a span of less than 10 years that all that happened. So as a fan, I'm looking at it going, ooh, man, do I want to invest in this? And locally, look, we didn't have the internet. You didn't have people that could just, well, I know a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy who once worked at the popcorn stand that heard somebody say that, so-and-so took a pill and that's what happened. You didn't have that gossip running rampant for anybody to have access to. You had to pay somebody 25 cents a month or something to get their dirt sheet of their made up lies that most people didn't know about. And the media treated it as how they would treat wrestling in the fake world of professional wrestling today, folks. Oh man, this became a real story. The tragedy of the Von Erich family. The tragedy, became like the world-class curse has hit Gino Hernandez, who was found dead. It became a dirty word because there was so much tragedy there. And at one time, and I think that was, that was kind of the end. And Fritz giving it to his kids was, they weren't ready for it. They weren't ready for it. They didn't want it. And then Kevin ended up selling it to Jerry Jarrett, which that didn't take long for him to run it into the ground and make it even worse than it possibly ever could have been. And Jerry just put all of his guys from Memphis on a bus. Come on down to Texas. We're going to go do TV in Dallas. Go do TV in Dallas and go back to Memphis. Didn't run the market as far as live events and everything, but he went down and shot TV, and it's like all these guys. I don't know these guys. Eric Embry, Jeff Jarrett. Nobody knew these guys. The only thing he had was Kevin and a few others, but it just, that was the nail in the coffin of world class. Didn't exist anymore. And then they actually went and had world class, man, tear the banners down and everything, and whatever the hell they called it after that, USWA or whatever the hell it was, Memphis Wrestling in Texas. So just, Jesus Christ, how the hell do you do that?
So, we've talked a little bit about how, New York was a babyface territory, and we know that Graham had elaborate finishes, and, in the Carolinas, they were a tag team territory, and, the Blanchards or Paul Boesch, somebody we talked about last week, always had a battle royal. What was a staple of world class. Like, you could always count on world class to feature what?
Well, here's the deal, man. You always had in Texas, and I think this was where that Texas pride comes from, is it was very believable. It was rough. It was rugged. It was big guys. So the size was one factor in that they always used big guys, man. You had to be at least 6 feet. You had to have some size to you, and you had to be tough because if you went out and you worked the Memphis style of, listen, look, man, Memphis was exciting and bang at the base, but it wasn't the most hard hitting, if you will. Texas was hard hitting. Texas was a place where, man, you better bring your jock strap and put it on, be ready to get hit. That was the signature, I think, all throughout Texas. It was just that reputation because it was always bigger guys, and it was always guys that worked snug and they were believable. And I think for world class, it was one of those that, they also had the kids, and the kids brought in the excitement, and the kids were able to bring in a brand new audience to come and see them. And they just believed in it because it was, you think about it, you're in the Bible Belt, man. It's about family. And now here's a family fighting together against the forces of evil. And that was their foundation. So families and all these big groups would come out and they would support, world-class wrestling for that reason. And, that's hard. I mean, that's a hard thing to keep up, if you know what I mean.
Well, I know what's not a hard thing to keep up. That's our friends at BLUECHEW.com. If you're looking for a world-class erection, and maybe you want to work kind of snug, maybe you want to work a little extra stiff, BLUECHEW can help. If you haven't already tried it, what are you waiting for? It's a unique online service that delivers you the same active ingredients as Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, but in chewable form and at a fraction of the cost. By the way, this process is super simple, y'all. Go sign up at BLUECHEW.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll get your prescription within days. And here's the best part. It's all online. That means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversation, no waiting in line at the pharmacy. The tablets are made here in the USA, prepared and shipped directly to your door, all in a discreet package. BLUECHEW wants to help you have better sex. Discover your options at BLUECHEW.com. Chew it and do it. And we got a special deal for our listeners. Try BLUECHEW free when you use our promo code WRESTLE at checkout. Just pay $5 shipping. That's BLUECHEW.com. The promo code is WRESTLE, and you'll receive your first month free. Visit BLUECHEW.com for more details and important safety information. And we want to thank BLUECHEW for sponsoring today's podcast. Well, Bruce, let's talk about Paul Boesch. We touched on him a little earlier. What were the hallmarks of Paul Boesch as a booker? The things you could always count on for a Paul Boesch show.
You could always count on what was advertised would be delivered, which is what drove Paul nuts when there was any kind of substitution. Didn't matter. If it was advertised, if it was a special event and someone didn't show, that drove him nuts. There was, in Paul's mind, there was no excuse for not making a date. There's planes, trains, and automobiles. You can get there. So from Paul's point of view was you deliver what you advertise, always try to over deliver, and to listen to the fans and give them what they want. And Paul was very big on giving finishes. He wanted to have finishes. Paul liked heat, but at the same time, by God, that baby face in the end was going to be victorious and give people someone to believe in. There were, again, talking about how he differentiated from the Dallas booking office. Jose Lothario would open up in Dallas and Fort Worth. He'd be in the opening match. In Houston, he would main event and sell out. So it was looking at the audience, which the audience was heavily Hispanic, African American. It was a very blue collar audience. That, man, trying to explain this to someone the other night about when Buck Robley took over the book and brought in guys that were just smaller and didn't fit the mold, if you will. It was, man, Houston, you had men. You had real men that went out there and fought. And they worked hard. And it was, you believed in what they were doing in the ring. So regardless of how you wanted to view the business, in Houston, when you would go, the audience believed what they were watching was real. So it was a solid, man. Paul brought the biggest stars. Tony Atlas, superstar Billy Graham, Nick Bockwinkel, Tommy Rich. He would bring Junkyard Dog. He would bring in stars from other areas into Houston, work programs with them, and then they'd be gone. They would always end up putting over the guy that was staying. Jose Lothario, he positioned Jose Lothario into being, the toughest guy, the toughest babyface. Didn't look like, the stereotypical what people would think right now is, oh man, that's my babyface. No, man, he looked like a tough guy. He worked like a tough guy, and that's what made the difference.
We're recording here on Wednesday morning, and as we're recording, Bruce, we're receiving the news just now that Virgil has passed away. The real life Mike Jones, who we saw as Soul Train Jones and Virgil and later Vincent over in WCW. Man, what an iconic character from the 1980s as part of the extension of the $1 Million Man character. I mean, this guy was in video games and all those vignettes and NBC and WrestleMania, and sort of WWE at its peak, right, Bruce?
Woo! Yeah, this is all in real time. It's a shame. It's just a shame. Sad. Mike Jones, man, Soul Train Jones is what he worked as before he came in as Virgil, the assistant to the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. Phenomenal physique. He was a natural bodybuilder and prided himself on that. And, in later years, I think that people had a little fun with the character, but sad day, man. Very, very sad to hear the passing of Mike Jones and Virgil. That's it's kind of stuff that hits you, when it hits you, because he was 2 years older than me, and don't know all the particulars yet, but I do know that Virgil had been sick for a while, and our condolences and our thoughts and prayers to the family of Mike Jones, and Godspeed.
Well said, man. That's not the curveball we expected when we sat down to record today.
Woo! And funny is, I was checking. We got no one's heard yet, and then immediately, right after that, yes, it's confirmed. And
yeah,
like, wow.
Every now and again, you see something online and you think, man, I hope that's a hoax. I hope they got that wrong.
Yeah.
I hope that's not true. And unfortunately, today it was true. And that era where he first came to prominence, nationally, That's the golden era for a lot of wrestling fans. I mean, everyone my age, that's what they think of. Sure, the Attitude Era maybe was bigger and a bigger part of mainstream or pop culture or what have you, but man, that's the era I grew up on, and he's a big part of that cast of characters, and it's just always sad when another one of your favorite parts of your childhood is no longer a real thing anymore.
Yeah, and it's especially difficult when one of your contemporaries,
Yeah.
you lose, and especially a guy that, man, like back in the day, who took care of himself, that really took care of himself and was all about saving the money, which was sad because I think in later years he didn't have all that much, and that's just a shame. So sorry to hear about Virgil leaving us today.
Amen. Let's try to talk about some territory stuff. Let's talk about Verne Gagne. You want to talk about a big time territory? Once upon a time, it felt like there were none bigger than Minneapolis. I mean, this guy was a real trailblazer in a lot of ways. You got guys coming through the camp. I mean, think about how many famous wrestlers are from Minnesota, number one. But then you got, guys like Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat coming through. And then when Hulkamania first becomes a thing, that's all with Verne. What did you think of Verne's booking and his style of presentation in the Minnesota territory?
So as a kid, all right, you you get into a habit, and wrestling was on in Houston. It was on Friday night and Sunday morning, and I knew those stars. But whenever I would go anywhere, whether it was Fort Worth to see my brother, or every summer I had to go to Hornick, Iowa. That's right. Look it up. Hornick, Iowa, to visit my dad's parents and his family. And all I would look forward to was I would ask everybody, man, when's wrestling on? What time is wrestling on? And it was on Saturday morning there at about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. The whole trip, I did everything my dad asked me to do. All I wanted was to see wrestling. And they had the AWA wrestling from wherever the hell it was shot at the time, Minneapolis, but it was a studio wrestling show. So I wasn't really used to that. I hadn't really seen that before. And they had Verne. I want to say during that, they had Larry Hennig. They had Dr. X. And, oh, God, maybe Bulldog Bob, Don Kent. Let me put it this way. It was so different because everybody looked old. Verne wasn't that old, but Verne was prematurely bald. Okay? So he made him look older than he was. And Verne, incredible athlete. All right? Verne could do anything. Incredible athlete. Yeah, you show a picture of him in 1930 when that's like he just came out of the womb there, where he had hair. But it felt old, and it was slow. And the commentators were over the top. Oh my God, look at that! And they were trying to make something that was not that exciting. Now, if that's what you grew up on, and that was the only thing that you saw, then by God, it was exciting. It was great. But coming from what I had been exposed to in Texas, man, it wasn't that exciting. It was, to me, it was slow. It was boring. It was wrestling, not wrestling. It was wrestling. And that's what Verne focused on. Verne wanted to push reality. Verne wanted to push, by God, what we do is real, and you sitting at home or buying a ticket to come to our show cannot do what we do in this ring. So don't even think about it. And if you do, you're going to get hurt. And chances are, if you were to get in the ring with any of those guys, then they were all extraordinarily tough and would make you think not once, twice, but wish to God that you weren't even born to think to get into the ring with them. And people would talk about Billy Robinson and how great Billy Robinson was at the time. Billy Robinson was great for them at the time because Billy was unique. He was different. He worked differently. He worked that English style. It was very quick and little fancy moves and stuff like that. But his promos were like listening to paint dry. They were just dull. And again, not knocking it, because for people at the time, that's what they knew. And by God, they loved it. You ask anybody, our friend, our good friend, Tim Sabian, it's like, Tim, Verne Gagne, by God, back in the day, Gene Okerlund and Verne Gagne, that was the thing. That's only because he had never seen Jose Lothario and Bruiser Brody and all these other guys. And they had talent. But Verne was able to take talent, man, and make it mean the most. He did very well. Look, you can't knock it, because in that area, and I think it also helps that you've got the University of Minnesota, at the University of Nebraska, you've got an area where amateur wrestling is as big as football is in the South. So people knew amateur wrestling, and they believed that the AWA with Verne Gagne, who was a national champion and world champion, that by God, he could beat anybody. Because I saw it. They brought in Chris Taylor. Chris Taylor was the 1972. I think he won a bronze medal, maybe. But Chris was okay. I don't know. Actually, I take that back. Chris was the shits. Chris was horrible. But he was an amateur, and he went to the Olympics. So by God, since he went to the Olympics, Verne was going to push him. Ken Patera was a power lifter, went to the Olympics. Verne pushed him because he was a real athlete. Kenny had personality. Ken learned how to work. Chris Taylor had no desire to learn how to work because he felt that since he was an Olympian, nobody should beat him. And in the real world, not that many guys in the business could have beaten him. But he also didn't bathe a lot. It was kind of stinky. Guys didn't want to work with him. So he was Vader before Vader. Very stinky. Smelled.
My goodness.
What? No, but I mean that was, look, I know we talk about this and people go, oh, you're talking about people's body odor. Think about this, though. You're in the ring with somebody. You're locking up with them. You're putting headlocks on them. They're putting headlocks on you. You're having to be right next to them. Take a shower. Clean your gear. Because it's kind of gross when someone really starts to sweat who already smells bad. And it gets on you. And it's just disgusting. So that's, I'm not making fun of shit. I'm just saying that's take a bath. Wash your gear. That's professionalism in this industry.
Bathing is professionalism?
Yes, it is.
That's awesome.
It is.
Oh,
Do you want Conrad? Okay. You're selling mortgages, and you got a guy that doesn't take a shower, and you got a guy that doesn't bathe, and he comes into the office and he reeks to high heaven. When someone walks in from the street to get a mortgage, oh, well, go back and see Stinky over here. I'm going to tell you right now, you send me to go see Stinky, I'm going to find an excuse within 2 minutes as to why I got someplace else to be. And I'm going to go find someplace else to go in a bank where they got people that take showers and wear clean clothes.
Well, you've always let Dave Silva produce our show, and he's not the biggest bather.
Well, but you know what? He stays away from me.
That's true. He does do it long distance.
Yes.
Oh goodness.
So,
listen,
so Verne was very much into reality. Verne wanted everyone to believe his stuff, but at the same time, Verne brought in guys like superstar Billy Graham, who did very well there because he was different. Wahoo McDaniel, but Wahoo was real. You know, Verne had a very successful territory built on reality and built on the fact that, you know, Verne ran that territory. Even when he was champion, they knew Verne was the guy because he positioned himself that way. And Verne always had, you know, he always had to have his champion be someone that he felt he could go on TV and talk about their credentials and talk about, you know, how legitimately great they were. Now, you take a look at, if you're watching on YouTube, take a look at the Nick Bockwinkel sleeper. The Nick Bockwinkel sleeper is a sleeper that was taught to Nick Bockwinkel by Verne. You know who taught Verne? Paul Boesch.
Oh, okay.
Paul Boesch gave Verne the sleeper. This is the correct way to put a sleeper on. You don't put a sleeper with your hand on top of someone's forehead. It does nothing. It's a shit. It's stupid. Don't do that. Okay? Matter of fact, I have a plaque downstairs from Verne to Paul. Thank you for the sleeper.
Wow, that's fun.
Verne Gagne. Because it made his career. It gave him a finish. It gave him something that people could believe in. And Verne put it on the correct way. Verne put it on as a shoot. If somebody came up to Verne on the street and said, oh, hey, yeah, I don't think that sleeper works, Verne would be good. All right, come here for a minute. Verne would put him out. Paul did the same thing. Because the way they did it was real. It's a shoot hold. Unbeknownst to Bobby Fulton, who one time said in the dressing room, oh, I thought that was just work. Duh. Everything you do in the ring should actually have a real application to it. And you should know how it really feels when you're putting it on holds. And you know, Verne liked to have that control in everything that he did. Sorry, I'm looking over here just to make sure. And
everything needs to look real, like the people's elbow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. You ever been hit with people's elbow?
No, don't want to.
Well, you don't want to.
No.
That's my point. So, you know, that was Verne wanted simplicity. And that's where, you know, was the ultimate. And look, Verne booked, man. Verne was going to book it, and he was going to book it his way. He would listen to people. He listened to people like Pat Patterson. He listened to people like Ray Stevens. He listened to Bockwinkel. But Verne booked. For all that time, man, Verne booked his territory. He was the end-all, be-all. Obviously, his son, Greg, you know, helped too. I think Greg has a tremendous mind for the business. He does. But he also has a lot of his father's fundamentals that those are hard to shake if you don't have an open mind. And it's Verne was convinced that his style of, you know, reality based, even when he had gone to the State Athletic Commission in Nevada and said, hey, we're not real. He was convinced that his style of wrestling and reality was the way to sell the business. And he, instead of taking care of his own territory at home, wanted to go venture out and prove if WWE is going to go nationwide and come into his territory, I'm going to go to New York. And he got destroyed. Because the biggest fault with all of the local territorial promoters, pretty much bar none, was they were so concerned about, instead of taking care of my home field and taking care of my business at home, I'm going to go hurt WWE in New York.
Yeah.
Okay, come on. It's free country. Come on. And they lost sight and they took their eye off the ball in their own territories. And I think that's what happened to Verne eventually, is that, Verne, guys made the AWA, like, if I can't get booked anywhere else, I'll go to the AWA, at least at the time. And at the end, they had a spot on ESPN. Maybe somebody will see me. But it wasn't to make money. And it wasn't, hey, this is where I want to go and I want to be, and grow. Hulk Hogan, Vince Sr. didn't want to do Rocky III. He did Rocky III because he wanted to do Rocky III and saw that would make him a star outside of the business. And coming back, Hulk figured, I can't go back to New York. Verne was the next biggest place to go. Came up with Hulkmania, and man, they ran with it. But because Hulk didn't have that amateur background, because Hulk didn't have the perception of being a legitimate guy, even though you put Hulk Hogan on the marquee in Chicago or Minneapolis or Denver or wherever Verne was promoting, it was selling out. Verne refused to make him the champion because he wasn't real. The biggest draw in the company.
Yeah.
The biggest fucking merch seller in the company. He's not real. We're not going to push him. Hulk finally made his way back, and the rest, as they say, is history. But it was Verne's firm belief that, man, you can't put a championship on a guy like that. People will see through it. You know what? Hulk gave that audience and gave the AWA territory something they had never seen before. Charisma, attitude, excitement, and blew the AWA up. Unlike they had, pretty much ever seen, other than in their heyday, with guys like Bruiser and Crusher and Bird and all those guys. Hulk was new. Hulk was different. Hulk was unique. And he was coming right off of Rocky III, so he's a movie star. And no matter what, Verne couldn't see past. I don't know. Could he beat Billy Robinson in a shoot?
Oh, my goodness.
No. Who cares? Does it look like he could beat Billy Robinson? Hell yeah. So I think that was the downfall of Verne. He just
too old school.
Too old school, and was not willing to let go. He had Rick Martel as champion. Rick was a great guy, but Rick couldn't cut a promo to save his life to bring people in. Ended up with Larry Zbyszko. Larry at least got a promo, and Larry was an awesome worker. But Larry was married to Verne's daughter. So he knew Larry wouldn't leave him. Or he thought Larry wouldn't leave him. But, Larry was tremendous talent, yes. But would you rather have had Larry Zbyszko or Hulk Hogan as your champion?
Right.
And I think that was the final downfall, really, of Verne, is just he wouldn't let go. He wouldn't open up to something new.
Maybe he was a little too old school. And speaking of old school, so was Sam Mushnick. St. Louis, man. Hard to talk about the history of professional wrestling and not talk about the NWA and Sam Mushnick and St. Louis. Chat me up. You know, the National Wrestling Association and then the Alliance, of course. One is sort of the athletic commissions, and well, Sam played a big role in all of this, sort of the roots of professional wrestling. Chat us up.
So Sam, everybody talks about St. Louis. That was not a territory. That was like Houston. That was one city that was booked by one man that was different than everything else. Sam did his own television. Sam shot his own programs and his own angles and did it specifically for St. Louis. Sam, I don't know how often St. Louis worked. I don't think it was every week, but St. Louis was the place. If you were going to be an NWA champion, you had to go to St. Louis, get over, man. If you won the Missouri title, the Missouri championship, then by God, a lot of times that was the next step to being the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. So Sam ran it very much like Paul Boesch. He brought in talent from all over, different territories. Everybody would come in and work for Sam. Sam paid very well. He was an honest guy. Sam was another one. He stood by. If it's advertised, we're going to deliver. And if you screwed Sam and you no-showed, you were persona non grata. Sam could be very vindictive. But Sam was his main, I guess, other than booking St. Louis and running St. Louis, Sam was the president of the NWA for so many years that what he did was, if you wanted to book the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, you went through Sam, and Sam kept the book for the championship. So Sam, in many ways, was the booker of the NWA title. Whoever that champion was, you had to go through Sam, get the dates, and then Sam would make sure that the champion was there. Plus, it was Harley Race and it was Houston. But Sam was money motivated, as a lot of us are, and felt that there were make-believe rules, and the NWA had bylaws, and there really is an NWA rule book. That actually existed. And Sam, they would write up all these rules and stuff that it meant nothing in a business in which we're all about entertainment and entertaining the audience, and it's gaga. Okay. This isn't a real competition here, Sam. And Sam treated it that way, though. And Sam brought to St. Louis a variety of different talent, so that, it wasn't regulars, man. It was in many ways the best of the best, because guys wanted to work in St. Louis. They wanted to get over in St. Louis because they saw the possibility of, man, if I get over in St. Louis, Sam likes me, I got a shot at being the champion. So you wanted to work there. You wanted to do well there. And it was funny things. I love the story of Jack Briscoe. Jack Briscoe goes to Japan, and Japan would love to do these things where they would have the champion drop the title to Giant Baba. Okay. Well, Baba could never get that approved by the powers that be in the NWA, like Sam Mushnick. Sam's like, oh, we're not going to do that. No. I want Baba to be the champion. Champion will get over there. Bob would come in with a briefcase, $25,000 or something, whatever that may be, and said, "Here, I'd like you to drop the title to me tonight. I'm going to drop it back to you the night before you leave. And here's $25,000. Guys did it. Jack Briscoe did it. Harley Race did it. And when Jack came back from Japan, Mushnick met him at the airport and said, "Hey, I want my cut. Told you we're not going to drop the title to Bobby. You did it. I know you got paid to do it. I want my cut." And Jack looked at him and said, "Sam, I made the trip. I made the tour. I made the deal, and you're not getting a penny." And Sam tried to, like, by God, I'll get my money. He says, "You're not getting it from me." And as the story goes, they sat there and argued for a while. And, what's Sam going to do to Jack Briscoe? What's pretty much anybody going to do to Jack Briscoe?
Right.
Unless, you're going to shoot him with a shotgun or something. But it was like the time that the Ole Anderson wanted the Road Warriors to break Jack and Jerry's legs. And the Road Warriors came and told Jack and Jerry, and they said, "Hey, guys, if you want to try. It's not going to turn out good for you." And
good for you.
And Road Warriors went out and worked a hell of a match with them. Jack and Jerry came back with 4 good legs. So Jack's not one that would be intimidated, and Jack kept all the money. Same thing with Harley. Harley was like, you know what, man, I'm making these trips. I'm doing this. And you didn't have the internet then, man. You didn't. The only thing that happened with Baba is the Japanese press was so prevalent that, they kind of had to recognize it, but they didn't really recognize it. In some places you saw it, but in others, they'd make an excuse. "Oh, that wasn't a sanctioned championship match." Or earlier in the match, Baba hit Jack with a closed fist, and that should have been a disqualification, so we can't recognize the title change. That kind of crap. So that Jack would have an uninterrupted title reign. But, so Sam thought he had a lot of power, and he did. He really did. But it was, what'd they get? Tell me what they got. They got one guy who had a belt with three letters on it. What was it? So he booked a title, is what he did. And in the day, it was in your territory, you wanted the champion. And you wanted the champion, to be on your shows. And so you had to go through Sam Mushnick to get that done. And then as you realize, guys like Roy Shire's like, why am I paying dues to a guy in St. Louis to book a guy that I could get booked on my own? Or I can make my own world champion. And I can have him every week. And I can book him out. Verne Gagne. Yeah, I made my own world champion. New York. Man, we got our own world champion. Fritz. I'll make my own world champion. Southwest. I'll make my own world champion. So the NWA lost its prestige and lost, really any kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Credibility. When people just saw through it, that it was just a money grab. And like, okay. And then Crockett, Crockett made the last $35,000 payment or whatever it was for the deposit for the championship, and kept the belt, kept the title, kept the champion, kept everything. And he started booking, that was with Ric Flair. And he started booking him. So it was For its time, I guess it worked, and you needed that. But in a business that is entertainment and is all about entertaining people, really, what good does it do? And Sam was very, very well respected, and he was a very nice man, but he was also a ruthless man, and very very set in his ways. And Sam was all about the dollar bill. So more respect to him, man, because he was able to do it, and he was able to do it as a promoter, not, never having worked, but he had the endorsement, and he was able to do it for many, many years. So, hats off to him. And again, it was prestigious to work in St. Louis, and that was all done based off of how how people felt about it. And if you felt good about it, then that was the right place to be, and right place to go and make yourself feel good. But I mean, there's other ways to feel good.
Let's talk about a great way to feel good. TheAmazingKind.com. This is something that has been a big part and a regular part of your life for a while now, Bruce. The topicals, man, they're really helping, are they not?
Dude, you have no idea. Look, if you're in pain and you're feeling like, if only I could just get these aches and pains to go away, you rub a little bit of the topical on there, and I kid you not, it is the absolute best, because it gets in and it stays and it makes it feel better. I'm not going to say like rub it on and it's gone, but rub it on, and in a few minutes, you're going to start feeling it work. And it's going to work and continue to work for several hours thereafter. I've tried everything. I have tried everything. The Amazing Kind, all of their products are the best. They are the best on the market, and I mean, everybody sent everything in the world to me. And the sleep time medicine at night not just helps you get to sleep faster, but for me, the important thing is it helps me stay asleep, and I absolutely love it. So it's a double dose. I do my shoulder, can't really do my elbow just yet, but when I can, I will. But anything else that pains me, sometimes you're on your feet all day, man. Put it on your feet. It's going to make you feel better. And don't we all just want to feel better? Check out The Amazing Kind and use our promo code WRESTLE, and by God, you're going to be happier than you ever have been.
TheAmazingKind.com. Be sure to use the promo code WRESTLE. You don't want to miss these CBD topicals. They've got potential pain relieving and anti-inflammatory effects. And of course, it also can help you with, well, the stuff you might not imagine. How about skin conditions like acne and psoriasis and eczema and dry skin? Yeah, it's not just good for pain, it's good for all that too. My wife is using it, and a lot of other athletes and fitness enthusiasts are saying that this really helps with muscle recovery, or even things like arthritis or dermatitis or just general skin irritation. We really believe in The Amazing Kind, and we know you will too. We want you to try it. Try some of these topicals. And as Bruce said, man, they got something for everybody. Even if you need an infused oil to help you sleep, you can find it all at theamazingkind.com and get 20% off when you use our special promo code WRESTLE. That's The Amazing Kind. They're creating plant-based pain relief balms, creams, and gels for all your muscles and joints, and also the infused oils for your mood support and sleep. It's all available right now at theamazingkind.com. That is theamazingkind.com. Be sure to use our promo code, 20% off. And how about that? It's WRESTLE, the easiest promo code of all, 20% off at theamazingkind.com.
Exactly. And when you feel better, everything else is going to be better.
Well said. And everything was better in Detroit back in the day when the Sheik had the book. You want to talk about an iconic wrestling character? The dude's up there blowing fire and bringing a sword to the ring and not talking, but boy, he was selling some tickets and making some people bleed. And he was drawing quite a bit of money too. What can you tell us about Detroit?
So, man, Detroit was an anomaly. I think that Detroit was where Ed Farhat, the Sheik, lived, and he made himself the top star. The top star was a non-speaking, portrayed himself as an Arab sheik, and threw fire, and had a pencil that he gouged people's heads with, and bled every single week and every single night that he worked. But he was able to sustain that and draw that because he was like the nastiest heel you could possibly imagine. He was able to book himself all over the country as an attraction because people had heard of the Sheik. All you had to do was show a picture of him and you're like, oh my God. One of the heels that I talk about, when he came out, you were legitimately scared. You didn't know what this guy would do. If he would take a step towards you, you bounce back because holy cow, he's really going to come because he doesn't speak English. He's not from here, and oh my God, he's got this turban on, and I'm terrified of him. Oh my! And he would come out with a snake sometimes. You don't want to get near that snake. It's terrifying. So he was real. Man, it was like there was something about him. You rarely ever saw him out of character in any way, shape, or form. And he had this dynasty in Detroit. That was his home. He booked Cobo Hall. He had top baby faces like Bobo Brazil that, oh my God, the number of times that he worked with Bobo Brazil, I don't think anybody could count. But Sheik and Bobo would bloody each other up. They would beat the living hell out of each other. And Sheik could get top talent to come in. The Funks would come in to work with the Sheik. Dory would come in 1 week. By God, Sheik would bloody him up, hurt him. Here comes Terry. Terry comes in, same thing, bloodies him up. Oh my God, now Dory's coming back. Well, we're going to fight you together. Well, I've got something in my back pocket. The Sheik would bring in Abdullah the Butcher. And you would have these two crazy foreigners, is what they were called at the time. I understand that that is not a PC term these days, but that's how they were viewed. And that's how they were billed. So it was this foreign menace against, the Americans. By God, it doesn't get more American than Texas. God bless Texas. And they would fight. And, everybody talks about the big blue cage in the WWE, man. You know the reason that the cage and that finish of, by God, you got to escape the cage to win? You know where that came from? That came from Bruno and Sheik having a cage match. Neither guy was going to do the job.
Oh, wow.
So you could beat the Sheik by escaping over the top of the cage, or you could beat Bruno by running from him and getting out of the cage first. That's the origin of that rule for the cage. Because in the South, cage match was a blow-off. Nobody in, nobody out. You're in a cage. You're locked in. The guy that can walk out of the cage is the winner.
Did they do that escape the cage thing in New York or Detroit or both?
Both. Toronto, all over the place. It was mainly in northeast. If you go from Detroit to New York, that's pretty much, and all up above in Canada, that's pretty much where that was the rule. Because it was easy. Guys didn't have to do a job. Very easy to beat the babyface when the object of the match is to run.
Yes.
But, Sheik was able to bring in talent from literally all over the place. You could bring in a Dusty Rhodes and work a program. Underneath, you had guys like Bulldog Don Kent, who was uh, a good heel for them. The Sheik would use Eddie Crutcham as his manager, but he would also use Abdul Farouk, and that was the Grand Wizard, Ernie Roth. So the Sheik always had a manager. The Sheik always had, somebody with him, but he was terrifying. Never did promos. He would go out to do promos, but on and throw fire and shit. Was one of the first guys to throw fire. And I remember getting so mad at Bill Apter one time because Bill Apter, on the cover of one of the magazines, you see the lighter in the Sheik's hands. The Sheik is throwing the fire. I'm like, oh God, man, how could you guys show that? Because to me, that was an expose, man. It was like it just came from his hands. That was the deal. But Sheik had a very, very successful territory. Small. He ran Ohio. He ran Michigan. And
did he run any Toronto at all?
He did. But that was a Tunney territory.
Okay.
So the Tunneys had Toronto, and but Sheik would run Windsor. Okay. But for the most part, Toronto and all that shit, that was the Tunneys, and he would work in conjunction with them. But anything within that Detroit area, that was Sheik's territory, and nobody got near it. He was very successful in what he did. He would bring in baby faces. The underneath programs, a lot of times that's where the angles were. That's what drew as well. But I said that's what drew. Sheik drew. The Sheik drew. People wanted to see somebody take down this foreign menace at any cost. And so you would bring in these top guys from all over the country, and Mark Lewin, good Lord, come in and work with Sheik. Had a long program with the Sheik. Good looking guy, and Sheik would bloody up that face to the fans' horror. Oh my God. What can stop him? And can't you see he's got a pencil? Ethel, he's got a pencil in his damn hand. Can't that referee see it? I can see it. Go back and watch the damn TV show. I saw it on there. Can't the referee watch that and go back and take it away from him? They don't check him good enough. I mean, but there was an aura, there was a mystique that I think until the day he died, that the Sheik kept the mystique. God, another beautiful sleeper hold. If you're watching on YouTube, Bobo Brazil putting on the Sheik. But the Sheik had these legendary matches, man, and was a guy that people paid money to see get beat. And that's the secret. And I thought that the Sheik had a great territory. I remember Gino Hernandez going up there and winning the United States Championship. I think he was 19 years old. Won the U.S. title first night in. Based on Paul Boesch calling the Sheik and saying, hey, got this young guy, he needs some experience. He's sent him to Mexico. He's been working for us. He needs to put some size on, but he needs experience elsewhere. Bring him in. Can he work? Yes. A lot of charisma. Great. Brought Gino in, first night in, won the United States Championship.
Wow.
Put him right up on top, man. And he worked, with Bulldog Don Kent, and kept him in the right spot, man, the whole time. But around that, you had the Dusty Rhodes, you had the Funks, you had everybody else coming in to work with the Sheik. And I think Sheik only worked with Gino maybe once or twice in the whole time, but kept Gino as a top guy. And that was the first place that Gino went in and was a top guy in the main eventer. So that was pretty cool. Sheik was a bright guy. He really was. He knew how to book himself. He knew how to take care of himself. And if the booking wasn't in a position for him to come out looking like a maniac, then he didn't do it.
Let's talk about the Tunney family. Of course, as a little WWF kid myself, I grew up with Jack Tunney as my figurehead president, by God, of the World Wrestling Federation. But we know the family from Frank to eventually Ed and Jack. But man, going before, the Jack Tunney that we know, what can you tell us about Frank Tunney?
So the Tunneys kind of ran Toronto. I would say not all Northeast. They did not run the Maritimes, but they ran everything kind of north of Buffalo and Vermont and all of that. Whipper Billy Watson was a part of that, and Whipper Billy Watson was an NWA World Heavyweight Champion. He was from Toronto, I believe, but he was a huge star in Toronto. And Frank was the promoter. Eventually, his nephew, Jack, took over and became the promoter and ran things in Canada. And they had quite the little fiefdom up there. For a long time, they were an NWA territory. But again, this was a place where the promoter booked a lot of the talent and booked a lot of the programs because they didn't run a whole lot, didn't have to, because it was a gold mine for them. They could run a few towns a week, and that's all they had to do. They didn't need to run a territory per se and bring in top guys and make money. And people wanted to work there because you could go work Toronto, then you could go work Detroit, you could go work New York, and then you can make your way down to the Carolinas. It wasn't for a top guy. That was a nice run. And the Tunneys always paid well. But at the same time, that's if you were on top. The joke always used to be that by the time that I got there was that, hey, if you got your ham sandwich, which in Toronto, they always had ham sandwiches for the boys, and Fresca. And I liked Fresca. So to me, that was a good deal. My payoff, I got a so they looked at it. It's funny. Jack looked at it as, hey, we're feeding the boys. Come on, nobody else is feeding the boys. We're feeding the boys. People are making fun of our ham sandwiches. I said, well, yeah, because a lot of times then you're only getting a $40 payoff. So, of course, you can feed them ham sandwiches and Frescas that you're stealing from the concession stand.
Right.
But that was the deal, man. That was the deal with Canada and with the Tunneys, was you got your ham sandwich and a Fresca. And that was a good deal. So they always had, they had access because they had access to the New York booking office. They had access to the Sheik and his guys in Detroit because it gave the guys in Detroit another place to go. And somebody's working in the Maritimes to bring them in, and just they were able to utilize that. They only needed 4 top guys to draw. So sure, they would do it. They broke away from the NWA and eventually ended up at WWF. That was their champion. And then later on the WWF. But Jack, I think, kind of got to the point of he still ran Toronto, but Jack was getting up in age. Billy Red Lyons was somebody that helped. Great guy, Billy Red. But Billy Red helped Jack run the town. And it became, they just used WWF television, used their programs. They booked it. Jack got a percentage. Didn't have to do anything, which wasn't far from what he was doing before, because they really didn't have to do anything other than put matches on a card.
Right.
And they drew. And Toronto has always been a great wrestling town. And going back then, again, Their hometown hero, Whipper Billy Watson, would make occasional appearances and would come in, and there was that belief, man, that was their guy. And you could bring in a Gene Kiniski from Vancouver, or bring him in, and like that's on the other side of the world. That's an international rivalry right there. Kiniski and Watson. It just was easy. That was an easy territory because they had so many places to draw from. And the Tunneys ran it all until, later on when Jack was ready to retire and the business just had outgrown him. And he was asked to do a lot more than what he had been doing, and decided, okay, you know what? I think I promoted my last show. I'm going to retire. And that was it. But you see, that's what happened to a lot of the territories, and a lot of the promoters were, they wanted to do things their way. And for so many years, they only did things their way for their market. And they did as little as they possibly could because it got ingrained. If you ran every Friday night, you just put an ad in the newspaper who was going to be there. And if it was hot, then people would show up. But they knew every Friday night you had a show. Every Tuesday night you had a show. And that's the way that so many different booking offices ran. Unlike, you get down south and you look at Georgia, or you look at the Carolinas and even Florida, where, man, those territories were really based on angles and issues and who's hot and what are you going to get for your money. And I'm going to start all the way down south because people always talk about Eddie Graham being one of the greatest minds and greatest bookers of all time. And I think that Eddie Graham, without a doubt, had one of the most unique and best minds for the business. Eddie Graham, look, I've heard both sides of it. I heard Eddie Graham was the guy that taught Bill Watts, how to book, that he brought Bill Watts in as booker, but it was Eddie Graham's philosophies and Eddie Graham's ideas as to why you do what you do. And we talked earlier about Dory Funk Sr. and that people, say, well, really, Eddie learned from Dory Funk Sr. How to book and the psychology of things. But Eddie ran Florida, and Eddie always ran Florida. He had bookers, and he had guys that had come in. He had Gary Hart booked for a while. He had Cowboy Bill Watts, where I think, a lot of people, including Bill, would say, man, that's where Bill really learned how to book and cut his teeth. Bill Watts is a guy booking Florida that took a heel in Dusty Rhodes and made him the American Dream. Dusty Rhodes made him the phenomenon that he became. And he did it by putting him up against, again, a foreign menace, as they would call him, Pak Song Nam from Vietnam. And Pak Song Nam was he Korean? He may have been from Korea. Pak Song was just this unstoppable force. And Pak Song and Dusty were tag team partners. And then Pak Song, Gary turned on Dusty. And that made Dusty the American Dream because he was talking about the foreign menace in Pak Song Nam. Pak Song Nam! You hear Florida, you hear America. Well, you're looking at the American Dream, and the American Dream is going to make your life a nightmare. So Bill was the guy that orchestrated all of that and put that whole thing together and really unleashed a phenomenon in the American Dream and let Dusty come out and be Dusty and be that flamboyant top babyface because people believed in Dusty. Dusty became, I'm one of the people. I'm you. When I'm in the ring, you fighting with me. Then when I throw that bionic elbow, That your elbow inside of mine, and yours, and yours, and yours, and yours, and everybody's elbow in him. He fought for the people. And that was Eddie Graham, man. And that was Bill Watts, and the way that they booked Florida. The Briscoes came in. The Briscoes were partners. The Briscoes helped book, but it was a conglomeration. Later on, Dory Funk came in. I remember Pat Patterson telling the story about, Pat, we're going to bring you in to be the booker with Johnny Valentine. Pat lasted 1 week because Valentine wanted to book things his way. And Johnny, as a booker, Johnny was a great worker, but Johnny was the kind of guy that got over slow and steady. And once he got over, he stayed over. But it took a while for him to get over. His booking, unfortunately, was the same way. Very slow, very steady, very straightforward. Only really put thought into the main event matches. But even there, it was, well, I'm going to go with the guys that are solid, that can work this style. And finally that went away. I think Michael Hayes booked for a few weeks in there, and a lot of different guys, Dory Funk, a lot of different guys came in and booked for Eddie, but there was always the influence of Eddie Graham. And Eddie, in many people's circles, I've only spoken to Eddie on the phone, and I met him twice, I think, in my entire life. But he was always a gentleman. I mean, like he looked like somebody with beautiful bleach blonde hair, combed straight back, good looking guy. But he, to me, and every time I was ever around him, his presence was that of a gentleman. And very smart. You will hear, many, many people throughout the years talk about the influence of Eddie Graham, not only on their own careers, but on the business, because his philosophies kind of just made their way all across the business. Whenever you would leave Florida, you would take a little piece of Eddie Graham's psychology and bring it into whatever it was that you were doing, wherever the hell it was, at the time. Kevin Sullivan. Kevin Sullivan is a guy that learned from Eddie Graham and that psychology. And then Kevin went with his own fucked up psychology that, man, it worked at the time. And I think Kevin has a different understanding of the business than a lot of people. And that's what you need. Because if everybody has the same philosophy and same outlook on the business, it means nothing. Because then it's all going to be the same. You need different takes. You need someone to be able to take Eddie's philosophies and Eddie's way of doing things and then make them your own. And I think that was what, Kevin Sullivan was able to do. You go up and you look into Georgia, and Georgia was a unique territory in that, based in Atlanta, it ran Macon and Columbus and just parts of Ohio and Chattanooga, and sometimes adventure into northern Florida, but not too often. And Georgia had ownership. There was ownership. Jim Barnett was an owner. Ole Anderson was an owner. The Briscoes were owners. Paul Jones, the promoter out of Columbus, I hope that's right. They all owned a portion of the Georgia booking territory. And Georgia always had bookers. And the bookers ran from Buck Robley to Bill Watts to Ole Anderson to Dusty Rhodes. Ran the whole gambit. So Georgia was a territory that, yes, they used bookers. They used guys that they would bring in, and they would help book. And it was their ideas that would then mold it. They would run it. Barnett would bless it. But for the most part, when Barnett brought a booker in, Gary Hart booked there. When Barnett brought a booker in, he let the booker do the wrestling side of things. Jim would give him advice, and Jim would tell him what he thought. and he would suggest things like, "Oh God, Tommy Rich," but Tommy, Ole saw that. Ole saw this kid has got unbelievable charisma and can do everything, and the audience is behind him. Who gets the biggest reaction every night? In Atlanta was also the first television show to be on a superstation, so it went everywhere. It was the first, and now you're booking Georgia, but you're going everywhere. And so now booking offices around the country are like going, "Hey, can I get a date on that Tommy Rich? That Rod Piper you got doing color commentary. Could we get a date on him? Bob Armstrong, the Superstation made the Atlanta territory and Atlanta stars everywhere, nationally, long before anybody was promoting nationally. And it also gave them the balls, if you will. Well, let's go up into Ohio. Let's go on up and go places that we can, that make sense on our tours to book and to run. So that's what they did. And, it upset people like the Sheik. It upset people that were normally running those markets. And look, they didn't care. They had the power of TBS, and they were able to go into Baltimore that was not a part of their territory. And bringing in the Carolinas, like with Jim Crockett, who had the Carolinas, and Jim Crockett had a lot of different bookers. That George Scott comes to mind. George Scott was I'd say a very vanilla worker. Great guy. I mean, God, I love George Scott to death, and think he was a really, really good guy. I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody that didn't like George Scott as a human being. But his booking was boring as shit. It just was boring. And the Carolinas had always relied on a lot of those old timers: George Scott, Johnny Weaver, Rip Hawk, Sweet Hansen, and the influx of the Ric Flair, now Ole Anderson, and Wahoo, and younger stars that were different. They were just different, and the whole thing kind of worked together. Crockett would use people from Georgia. Georgia would use people from Crockett. Georgia would use people from Florida. Georgia would use people from Texas. Sent Gino there for a while. Sent my brother there for a little while, and they would use these talents to come in and get exposure. So while you're watching in Houston and you're watching TBS on cable, oh my God, Gino's on cable. He's in Atlanta. Holy shit. Makes him a bigger star. And, when you talk about the bookers of, Ole Anderson, who just passed, and Ole was a constant. And Ole was one of those guys who had a mind for the business, and he was a very straightforward, rough and rugged guy that ruled with an iron fist. But I think that when you think of Georgia, and you think of Georgia Championship Wrestling and later World Championship Wrestling, the bookers that have come through there is kind of a who's who of the business. Dusty is a great, is a great name that came through there and booked and was very successful. But always in that mix was Ole Anderson, who stayed in until, when WWF came in and they bought out the Briscoes, they bought out Paul Jones, they bought out Jim Barnett, and owned the majority of Georgia Championship Wrestling, which brought you to Black Saturday. Ole Anderson was the only guy that held out and said he had never worked for the WWF. Never did.
Pretty famous story there too, huh?
Yeah, it absolutely it is, because it was something that happened, right underneath everybody. And Gunkel was, another one that was a part of that still had Ray's percentage in Georgia Championship Wrestling. So that in and of itself was unique. And then, as you go past Georgia and you get into Tennessee and look at, Tennessee was interesting from the standpoint of, there was the Memphis end, Memphis, Nashville, and they do Louisville and everything. And then you get down to Chattanooga and kind of the Chattanooga and Alabama and Pensacola and things like that, which would kind of be the continental base thing. But Tennessee was another one that was interesting. I think people give Jerry Jarrett a lot of credit, and Jerry deserves a lot of credit for owning it. And where I think Jerry Jarrett was best at was Jerry put Bill Dundee and Jerry Lawler in charge of his booking. And he also pit Lawler and Dundee against one another, figuratively and literally. He would pit them in programs against one another, but he also pit them against each other backstage. Jerry would have Lawler book and then tell Dundee how great Lawler's doing and send Dundee away. I don't need you right now. Then he'd get sick of Lawler and he'd bring Dundee back and get rid of Lawler. Lawler would go to wherever, Texas, or he'd go to Florida and have a stint there and then come back. But that's how Jerry played it. Other than Dundee and Lawler, I can't tell you any successful bookers that really booked the Memphis territory, if you will. And it was a different territory too. The guys lived there, and that's all they did. And on the east side, you had Goulas, and this is only my opinion. I thought that was just a horrible cartoon, with George Goulas and Tojo Yamamoto and just some of the guys that came out of there. It just wasn't the same. It was just hokey in comparison. And when you have seen everything else, I think when you compare every other territory that was very reality based and what have you, then you got to Memphis, and Memphis was the wild, wild west. And it was a lot of gimmicks. It was a lot of gaga. It was just different. And I think that's where that, the term, all that Memphis wrestling bullshit. Hey, it worked for Memphis. It worked for that territory. So I think they looked at everything else as, you can bring in that WWF, or you can bring in that Texas wrestling. That's all bullshit. Here in Memphis, we got Jerry Lawler. He's the king. So, but.
Well, it was exciting. I mean, Memphis was exciting. And what else is exciting is Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the daily fantasy sports platform in North America that is now the largest one. They're also the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. You see, it's just you against the numbers. Instead of you trying to battle out thousands of other players, including the pros and the sharks, you just pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 different player stat projections and just watch the winnings roll in. Now, football season might be over, but the action on the floor is just heating up. Whether it's tournament season or the fight for the playoff home court, there's no shortage of high-stakes basketball moments this year. Get in on the excitement with Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app, and you can turn your hoops knowledge into serious cash. And right now, you can win up to $100 extra money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries all today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. By the way, you want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like Meek Mill and Sugar Sean O'Malley? Well, you can find them all in the community plays under the promo tab on each week. By the way, the conference tournaments are here, and that means the biggest moments in college basketball are getting closer. So be a part of the action on Prize Picks for both the men and the women's college basketball tournaments. Prize Picks even has injury insurance. We've talked about this before, but let me explain. Your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For basketball games, if you have a player who gets hurt in the first half and they don't come back in the second half, well, that player projection won't count against you, and the rest of your entry stays live. They've also hooked it up so you've got things like Apple Pay now for easy and fast deposits. They've got special promotions like Taco Tuesday where they give you a little more value as well. They've even got quick and easy withdrawals, easy gameplay. Man, there's something for everybody. I love this. I think you will too. And if you're like me and you're watching NBA basketball, this is easy, man. You can make stuff like, let me give you an example. I think Steph Curry is going to get more than 29 points. I think Anthony Davis is going to get less than 2 blocks. That's it. You've just made 2 selections. That's how easy it is to play daily fantasy sports with Prize Picks. Go right now and download the app, Prize Picks, and use our code WRESTLE, and you'll get a first deposit match of up to $100. That's download the Prize Picks app today. Use our promo code WRESTLE. You'll get a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy. Bruce, we had a good time talking about the territories. You know, we touched on a little bit of everything. We touched on Bill Watts. We touched on Jerry Jarrett. We touched on Bill Dundee. We touched on Dusty. It's kind of dawned on me as you were talking about Georgia, though. Ted Turner allowing wrestling to be on the Superstation and it really planting the seeds for everybody to think, wait, there's more to this than just our territory. That's sort of something we don't talk about a lot. I mean, I'm sure Vince eventually would have went national no matter what, but the idea that delivery system was possible, that's a feather in Ted's cap, right?
Yeah, Ted didn't give a shit about the wrestling going national. He gave a shit about his Braves going national.
Yeah.
The wrestling was a byproduct of that. Ted loved wrestling. Yes, he did. But he didn't. I don't think that he realized the power of the Superstation, how it would affect that. That just was a byproduct of it.
Oh, for sure. But I'm saying a lot of people wouldn't have put wrestling on if they knew they were trying to do a national program. They wouldn't have put wrestling once upon a time.
Yeah, but even, you know, it wasn't looked at that way. It was just cable, and it was just to have a Superstation was you had WGN in Chicago and you had TBS in Atlanta. You had the Jersey station, WPIN or whatever. You had 3, and it was picked as here's samples and things from around the country, from top markets. And Ted was lucky enough to be in that, and I think Ted fought for that. And Ted fought for it because of the Braves and owning the Braves and getting them so that everybody could have access to that. You know, if you're wanting to watch baseball and you're a big baseball fan, then you'll watch anything. And the concept of the Superstation, it was getting New York TV. WGN in Chicago later had wrestling, but I think Ted was the first, and it got out there, and man, it just it was a phenomenon. It was different. It was great, and it got it to the masses, but not near the masses by the time that USA came on, and by the time that first Southwest and then WWF got on USA, cable penetration had more than doubled or quadrupled, because I didn't get, so for example, where I lived in Houston, I didn't get cable until 1982. We didn't have cable. Couldn't get it. So there was just spots that had it. In Houston, I think there were maybe 2 different cable companies in 2 different parts of town that had cable. Everybody else, man, was just on regular TV. So it wasn't really until about, 84, 85 that cable really started getting the penetration. But early days, fucking A, yes. Man, TBS was great because it was different, and there weren't 500 channels. You had like 79, something like that. To choose from. You didn't have HBO and Showtime and all that stuff. You didn't have the Food Network or anything else. I want my MTV, and you got some different stuff, but that was about it. So yeah, it was a turning point without a doubt.
Talk to me a little bit about Jim Cornette and Smoky Mountain. I mean, I realize that's not super old school from a traditional territory standpoint, but he did run a small territory, and we did get to see, his booking mind and the way he ran a promotion. I know you didn't keep up with it religiously, but you were familiar. What did you think of Smoky Mountain and Cornette's vision for wrestling?
I think he ran it like Memphis wrestling. That's what he loved. That's what he grew up with.
Yeah.
And that's what Jimmy wanted it to be. The wrestling the way it used to be and the way you want it. That was his slogan. And Jimmy wanted Memphis wrestling again. And I think that's the way that Jimmy wrote it.
That's awesome. What about ECW and Paul Heyman? What did you think of that quote unquote territory?
I go back to, you got to start with Eddie Gilbert, really, and Eddie going up, and who was the guy? There was DC Drake and Eddie brought Paul, but the idea was to bring Eddie in as the booker and run that little territory there, and Eddie did come in after Eddie's passing. That was an opportunity for Paul to step in. And look, man, Paul wanted to be different. Paul didn't want to do the same old, same old. So Paul went extreme, as far as extreme different as he could get. Hence, Extreme Championship Wrestling. So it was blood and guts. It wasn't for everybody, but there was an audience out there. A small audience, and unfortunately for them, that audience was too small to sustain it. It was, if he could have just stayed in Philadelphia and could have just stayed in the areas that did, support that product, who knows? But I don't know that it was sustainable, because Paul just wanted blood and guts, and to be different. And sometimes being different and not giving anybody anything of what they are used to is like, you either have to love it or you hate it. And I think that put him in an awkward position.
Have we talked at all about Ric Flair as a booker? I know he never really officially ran a territory, but allegedly he was a part of a lot of those WCW booking committees. Do you have any thoughts on Rick's philosophy as a booking?
I was never around Rick as a booker, so I don't know. I've heard stories, but I think that Rick was put into because, hey, Rick was a champion. He's been everywhere. He's done everything. But I don't think that Rick ever really wanted, this is my opinion, I could be completely wrong. I don't know that Rick ever wanted that responsibility. Rick doesn't want people to not like him.
Right.
So Rick didn't want to be the booker. Rick didn't want to be the guy to say, hey, no, man, we can't use you.
Right.
So that, I think, in and of itself, you have to be, look, you got to hire and fire people if you're going to be the boss. And that's a part of business. So, yeah, I don't think Rick liked that part. And I don't know how much, because of Rick's schedule, how much Rick was involved in the book. I've heard a lot of different things, but I wasn't there. So I don't know. I can't tell you any idea that was Ric Flair's idea that, oh my God, set the world on fire. Oh my God, shit the bed. I can't tell you one. And I don't know that anybody that was on that booking committee could do that. What I have heard from people on the booking committee was Rick didn't want the heat.
Right.
And I blame him. Rick was still working. Rick's got to go in the dressing room. Rick has to work with all these guys. And that wasn't Rick's MO. Dusty didn't give a shit.
Right.
Dusty was like, yeah, man, I'll take the heat. I won't put myself on top. I'm going to take the heat. And until you can take it from me, forget it. Rick's not that kind of guy. Rick's going to go out and do his job and say, hey, top that.
Well, he was the top guy for Jim Crockett Promotions. We talked about a lot of the other big territories. We didn't spend much time talking about JCP. What was the reputation that you knew of for Jim Crockett Sr. and then his son, Jim Crockett Jr.?
Well, I didn't know Jim Crockett Sr. I knew him from Paul Boesch. And Paul Boesch had a lot of respect for Jim Crockett Sr. Paul had zero respect for Jim Crockett Jr. Felt that, and from what I understand, Jim Crockett Sr. and Jim Crockett Jr. kind of had an estranged relationship. I don't know if that's true or not, but I remember the first meeting with Jim Crockett and Paul had this picture of Jim Crockett Sr. pushing Jim Crockett Jr. on a swing, and Paul had it blown up and framed and a nice thing to give to Jim Crockett Jr. I think Jim Crockett Jr. just kind of looked at it and put it down and left it in the dressing room that night. And that really hurt Paul. And it was like, this inconsiderate. Look, man, Jim Crockett Jr. is a polarizing guy. I know he's not viewed as that, but Jim Crockett Jr. was not the nicest guy to everybody. If you were a top guy and he needed you, he was great. But outside looking in, and the few interactions I had with Jim Crockett Jr., I just wasn't warm and fuzzy guy. Wasn't didn't care about you if unless you could do something for him. That was my impression. And I think, hearing from Paul and how much he respected Jim Crockett Sr., that Jim Crockett Jr. was just, the trust fund kid that got into the business because he thought it was easy.
Well, something that is easy is to sit around and listen to you talk about the territories. I've really had a blast last week and this week talking about the good old days. And I'm not going to say we could get an episode 3 out of this, but I do think we could if you guys drop some questions on us. So that's what we want you to do. Head on over to our YouTube, and in the comments from part 1 or part 2 of our territory episodes, drop some questions, and we'll be back at some point in the future. Maybe we'll make it YouTube exclusive, doing more territory talk with your questions. So any of the territories, any of the bookers, any of the promoters, anything you've got a question about, drop it on either the territory video 1 or territory video 2, and we'll revisit this topic. You can be a part of all this on our YouTube. It's absolutely free, by the way. SomethingToWrestle.com. You want to go ahead and hit the subscribe button and then turn on the notifications bell, because we might actually do a territories episode live. How about that, Bruce? That'd be fun, wouldn't it?
Yeehaw!
And we're excited to announce a new affiliate partnership with Fanatics. Easy for me to say. The world's largest collection of officially licensed fan gear It's an easy way to support your favorite podcasts. Shop for your favorite players and teams by going to shopsportsmerch.com. That's shopsportsmerch.com. Or if you're watching along with us on YouTube, just hit that QR code that's up on your screen right now. Or just check out the description below for the link. We'll also have it up on all of our socials. You can shop with confidence for your favorite jerseys, caps, shirts, jackets, hoodies, and more with Fanatics. But be sure to use our special link, shopsportsmerch.com, and that will support our show. In the meantime, we would love to talk about your product or service here on the show. If you're looking for men 25 to 54, there's no better place to advertise than right here with us. We've got a very targeted audience, so there's very little waste. Find out how affordable it can be at advertisewithbruce.com. And if you've got a question for next week, man, it's easy. Be a part of the conversation on social media. It's at Prichard Show on Twitter and Instagram. It's Something to Wrestle over on Facebook. Our YouTube is where you can find all of our archives at somethingtowrestle.com. And we got lots of fun swag available for you now at somethingtowrestleshirts.com. That's somethingtowrestleshirts.com. Bruce, did we cover the territories pretty thoroughly? Is there anything else you want to mention today before we put a button on today's episode?
No, I think we're good. I think that there's always, ways to get back and talk a little more. And again, we're doing it in an abbreviated form and probably could do episodes on some of those, but again, this is, it's like when you and I originally talked, it's my experience. It's look, this is all my opinion. This is my interaction with people that I did work with and people that of how I was dealt with and what happened during that time. So it is what it is. You want to hit me with, oh, well, no, in fact, this actually happened. Okay, maybe it did. And not saying, this is, it's my experience.
The way you remember it. Yeah.
It's my, it's how I remember how I felt and, what I dealt with, through the years dealing with guys. And here's the funny thing, unfortunately we lost Ole Anderson this week and Virgil. And when we got the news about Ole Anderson, I, looked at the folks I was sitting next to. I said, it's one guy in the business that very influential in the business, one of the most influential in the business. I never met Ole Anderson.
Really?
Never met Ole.
Wow.
In all my years in the business, 50 years, I never met Ole Anderson. So, it's weird. Heard a lot about him. Got a lot of, a lot of opinions about Ole, but personally, never met the man. So it's I'm kind of sad about that. But just so I can say I met him and I could have a real experience to share.
Well, Bruce, we appreciate you sharing your experience with us today. This was an absolute blast. We want to do more of this. Cruise on over to somethingtowrestle.com. Find our part 1 and part 2. Drop those questions below right now on the video you're watching right now. And man, we'll have some more fun with this in the future. Until next time, he's Bruce Prichard. I am Hey, it's Conrad. And we are Something to Wrestle with Bruce Prichard.
Rock on!
Double J, Jeff Jarrett, here to tell you a little bit about the nonstop savings happening over here at SaveWithConrad.com. Are high credit card balances holding you down on the card? If you're looking to give a guitar shot to your credit card debt or give your home the push it deserves with some upgrades and remodeling, you need to go to SaveWithConrad.com. That's right, SaveWithConrad.com. Conrad and his team are routinely helping my world listeners save $500, $600, $700, even $800 a month. Oh, did I mention you get to skip your next 2 house payments? Take a cue from the last outlaw, because if anybody knows how to get the bag, it's me. Strut on over to SaveWithConrad.com today and see how much money you can save for free. That's right, it's SaveWithConrad.com.
NMLS number 32416, equal housing lender.
SaveWithConrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson here to tell you a little more about what AdFreeShows.com is all about. Get early, ad-free access to more than a dozen of your favorite wrestling podcasts every single week, starting at just $9. That's less than 20 cents an episode each month. And yes, you can listen to them all directly through Apple Podcasts or your regular podcast apps. How easy is that? Ad-free shows also has thousands of hours worth of bonus content and docuseries like Title Chase, Eric Fires Back, Conversations with Conrad, and The Insiders. Plus new series like The Book with David Crockett, Monday Mailbags with Mike Chioda and Nick Patrick, and a whole lot more. And you want to talk about early? You can't get any earlier than listening to the shows live. You can be a part of the live studio audience as we record the podcast. Plus, ride shotgun alongside your favorite childhood heroes for live watch-alongs, Q&As, and other interactive experiences every single month. Come on now, see for yourself what thousands of other wrestling fans from around the world have discovered, that adfreeshows.com is the best value in wrestling. Check it out today, and hey, when you do, the first week is completely free. adfreeshows.com.